This is an origin story. My first digital camera was a Canon XSI I bought for real cheap. It was a good camera to learn on because it was cheap and I didn't know what I was doing. It started showing its true colors when I would go to live events and fellow photographers could get usable photos with the same available light as mine when I couldn't. Next I bought new, the only camera I've ever bought new, Canon T3i. It was supposed to be a baby Canon 5D Mark II, which pretty much was. I wasn't really sold on it and ended up selling it. Then next I bought my Nikon D200 from a construction superintendent in New Jersey. Now this camera was well below the specs of my Canon T3i, but I loved it. The colors were warmer and it was weather sealed. It had a top LCD and it felt great in the hands. Also keep in mind, my only lens was a Nikon 50mm f1.8D lens, and this is what I cut my teeth on in terms of ISO, shutter, and aperture. So for about 2 years it was my right hand. Through many concerts, hurricanes, and day-to-day photo walks, I used it. Now I never got rid of it obviously, but the fact that anything above ISO 400 got terrible in terms of noise, I needed something a little bit more modern. My next camera was a Nikon D7000. It was better in every way technically, but I always enjoyed using it a little less. There will always be diehards that church up the virtues of using an older camera like this. They'll say it will teach you discipline from what it lacks. But if you want that, just get a film camera, or even a large format camera if you're going old school worker class on new stuff. I feel like watching people preach about cameras like this is like watching a neighbor buy a two-door sports car. They like it now, until they inevitably buy a minivan or wagon when they get married and have kids. And just like your weird uncle who wants to talk about how Beavis and Butthead was triple S tier comedy and still drives his yellow C4 Corvette, it's a little weird when these people get a platform. Now back to the D200. I love this camera. When I got it, I had to fix the cracked top LCD display, replace the grip material, throw away the broken battery grip and get a new one, and I added a rear screen cover. Some interesting quirks are the switch to open the compact flash cover, the off-white tan buttons on the back that don't match the white ones, the rubber dials, and outdated technology. This camera was just fun to shoot. It wasn't light at about 1.5 pounds, but it felt great in the hands. The size of the grip and weight just felt right. The D200 just felt like it was ready to do the work needed. It had its sleeves rolled up and was ready to burn the midnight oil. When it comes to the measly 10.2 megapixel sensor, there's pretty much no way to crop your photos. So if you didn't get the composition or framing you wanted, you are SOL. You of course can crop it, but those images start to look more and more like found UFO screenshots. First significant others will always hold a place in our hearts no matter what. We wouldn't be with the person we're currently with if that first one worked out. And that's the same with this camera. If this was a 5D Mark II, who's to say I wouldn't still be using it? But I'm not using my D200 today for many reasons. It wasn't me, it was you. Experience is the only piece of gear that will transfer to every camera you own for the rest of your life. So how much do our first workhorse cameras affect the future of how we frame things and work behind the camera? And what did I learn from this camera? Well, I learned to hold it steady and the benefits of having a fast lens. I also learned how to take photos using a 75mm focal length equivalent by accident. For some reason, I thought the 50mm f1.8D was a 50mm on an APS-C camera like this. No idea why I thought that. Maybe I just saw it posted on a forum somewhere. Now, is there a good reason to buy this camera today? No, absolutely not. A good condition D200 should run you close to 130. For 100 to 150 more, you could get a Canon 70 or Nikon D7000, or even an Olympus OM-DE model or a D300S. These all outperform the D200. This camera also has a CCD sensor, unlike the D7000, my D810, or most modern DSLRs. The difference between a CCD and a CMOS sensor aren't enough to make a clear winner, but more than enough to create online debates and forums. When it comes to a starter camera, I don't think there are any right answers, only wrong questions. And just like how back in the day, used basic cars often wouldn't have things like air conditioning, cruise control, power windows, and airbags, and most of today's current entry-level econo cars come with most of that standard, if you get a semi-modern DSLR today or a mirrorless camera now, you most likely have higher performance ISOs, faster buffers, lighter bodies, and better autofocus than what people were using in the past. If you're thinking about getting your first camera, or are on the fence of upgrading your current one, take a deep breath, and realize that the camera isn't as important as the time you put in with it. That's what I don't understand about people recommending this camera. I get wanting classic, retro, or vintage film cameras. They're different and are better in some ways. But why would you pick something with technology that you're going to outgrow, like a 250cc motorcycle? My hope is that this isn't another look at my camera or reasons to buy this camera video, but rather a look at how your first camera may or may not impact you, and this was mine.